Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Tab for a Cause. So this is a pretty unusual video for me. I usually kind of stay in my own little YouTube bubble working on my own thing, but last week I saw a video called Sam Raimi's Spider-Man Trilogy, Worse Than You Remember, and had some opinions. Okay, a lot of opinions. So I figured this week I'd try something a little different and reply to some of the criticisms of that video. It's from Marcus over at the Cosmonaut Variety Hour. I've put a link to the video in the description, which I highly encourage you to check out, so you can decide for yourself if I'm being fair to it and not taking anything out of context. Also because it's pretty funny and well edited. First off, I want to say that I'm not going to be responding to it point by point for a few reasons. One, it's very long and there's some parts that I agree with, like the actors looking way too old to be in high school, the special effects in the first film being pretty shaky even for the time, and that some of the film feels dated today. Two, a lot of the video is actually more for comedic purposes than actual criticism, which is totally fine, but I don't need to respond to it. And the last section of the video is about Spider-Man 3, which has been criticized over and over again, usually very accurately, so I'm not going to spend much time on it here. And finally, the simple fact that a lot of the points are kind of unfair nitpicks. Like this part, where he criticizes that no one present at Doc Ock's experiment is wearing protective gear.
Firstly, he has this extremely dangerous demonstration in his apartment with no protective gear given to anybody in the room other than goggles for himself.
And it's like, alright, there's two ways I could respond to that. One is by saying that an aspect of Otto's personality is that he's very self-confident. The guy clearly has a healthy ego. Earlier in the movie, we even see him laugh off the idea that this experiment could be dangerous at all. He's clearly not worried about it, so it probably never occurred to him that these people would even need protective gear. But that's the kind of criticism that it seems kind of goofy for me to even respond to at all, because let's be honest, would the movie be better if these people were in hard hats and goggles? Not really. It's just a minor nitpick and there's really no reason to focus on it. So I'm gonna ignore most of those, except maybe the ones that really annoy me. Instead, I'm really gonna hone in on 2 points. Why I don't think the video gives due credit to the character work of the first two films, and why I think he misses the mark when criticizing the unique Raimi sense of humor. So with all that being said, let's dive in.
I love animals, but this is too much.
First off, I want to play a very minor critique of Marcus's that I think illustrates a larger problem with the way he approaches these movies.
For now, let's look at how Harry introduces his dad.
Peter, may I introduce my father, Norman Osborn?
Why would you introduce your dad by his full name? That's kind of weird, but whatever.
So I agree with him here that a guy introducing his best friend to his dad using his full name is pretty weird. It's kind of overly formal, right? So did the screenwriter just get really lazy here or what? Well, no. We've just watched Harry and Norman talk in the car and seen how uneasy they are just being around each other. It's pretty clear, and it becomes even clearer as the movie goes on, that these two do not exactly have a healthy father-son relationship. Harry desperately wants Norman's approval, and Norman is constantly reminding Harry that he doesn't have it. In that context, this awkward, formal introduction makes sense. It's kind of an awkward, formal relationship. And I don't think Marcus really pays that much attention to Harry's, or really any of the other supporting players' character arcs at all, outside of their function as a plot device for Peter's story. Like in this moment where he criticizes the bad acting from the extras in the first film. That would be exactly the kind of nitpick I'd ignore, except then he throws in this clip of Harry.
Even main characters have a chance of devolving into idle Sims when they're not the focus of the scene.
Now, I like the idle Sims line, but I think he's missing one thing. This is not bad nonverbal acting from James Franco. It's actually the opposite. Think about what this scene actually is. Norman has just walked up to his son's high school graduation, given Harry a backhanded compliment.
Great. You made it. It's not the first time I've been proven wrong.
And then immediately moved on to talking to Peter. He congratulates Peter on winning the science award, puts his arm on his shoulder, and tells him he knows he's had a rough time since Uncle Ben's death. So this awkward little duck out of the conversation, it's not bad acting. It's Harry realizing that that crappy congratulations is all he's gonna get from his dad. Now that may seem like a small point to criticize, but for me, Marcus overlooking the more subtle character work in these movies is one of my biggest issues with this video. And and I think that becomes even more evident when he talks about Aunt May.
And then we have Aunt May, who nags the shit out of Peter Parker in every scene that he's in. She abuses random people. Ow! And in the most egregious instance of mischaracterization, she makes Peter feel more guilty for Uncle Ben's death. At a crucial point in the movie, Peter is like, hey, Aunt May, it's been eating me up inside. I basically caused Uncle Ben's death. I didn't know how to tell you, and I'm so sorry. All I want is forgiveness. And she's basically like, wow, you're a piece of bye. And then she just leaves.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest, this kind of annoyed me. I don't think that criticism is fair to the character, and it completely disregards the performance. Rosemary Harris is great in Spider-Man 2. She brings so much depth to a character that's often reduced to being really one note. And honestly, it kinda seems like Marcus would have preferred her to be more one-dimensional. Let's talk about that scene at the dinner table that he criticized. This, in my opinion, is one of the best scenes in any superhero movie ever. It's smartly written, emotionally acted, and treats its characters like human beings, not cartoons. Marcus seems to have a problem with Aunt May's response here, like it was really selfish or something for her to not forgive Peter on the spot, and I just don't get it. I mean, think about it for a second. Aunt May, who has been dealing with the death of her husband for maybe a year tops, was just told that not only did Peter have a chance to stop his murder and didn't, he was also there when he died and had been lying about it this whole time. That would be a lot for anyone to process, so, maybe cut the woman some slack. Aunt May isn't a saint, she's a person and she reacted like one. Oh, and also he seems to take issue with May being kind of mean to this guy who just denied her a much needed loan, and you know what, fine, but in my book, people being mean to smarmy bankers played by Joel McHale is extremely good and should be in way more movies. Then there's this scene in the yard, which he completely dismisses.
Even when Peter comes back and he tries to talk about it again, to get some closure, she's basically like, well, you f***ed up, but whatever. This is not Aunt May, and it makes me really mad.
Which, again, is totally baffling to me. Not only does May clearly forgive Peter in this scene, she also then delivers the speech that verbalizes Peter's entire character arc in Spider-Man 2 in a really great, well-written, and earned way. But the video doesn't even mention that. In fact, he never really talks about the character arcs at all, except to dismiss the ones that annoy him. He doesn't like that Harry keeps bringing up how mad he is at Spider-Man, which, again, cut the guy a break. He believes his best friend knows Spider-Man, the man he believes murdered his dad in cold blood. I would have a pretty hard time letting that one go too. But Marcus seems to dislike Mary Jane most of all. And there's some stuff I agree with him on here. It is lame and lazy that she's put into this damsel in distress role 3 times in a row. That, I agree, is a pretty glaring flaw in the trilogy. But again, I think he really misreads her arc in Spider-Man 2, painting her as this kind of awful Machiavellian villain, saying that
she spends the whole movie f***ing with Peter's emotions.
Now there might be some truth to that, but it kind of ignores that from her perspective, Peter is doing the exact same thing. Without knowing he's Spider-Man, his actions would be insanely confusing to anyone else. Marcus seems to think she's hitting on Peter in this scene in the backyard. Yeah, it's an intimate moment, but what she's clearly trying to do is to get him to open up and actually tell her, for once, what's really going on with him. And after all they've been through, I don't think it's wrong of her to want that. Then, after he makes it clear that he's not going to let her in pretty much at all, she tells him she's seen someone. Is this petty like Marcus claims? Sure, maybe a little, but it's also human and it makes sense. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to watch movies about perfect people who do the exact right thing all the time. Anyway, then Marcus really ups the ante and says she only got engaged to John Jameson as revenge on Peter.
You learn that she's only f***ing this other guy because she's mad at Peter Parker. She agrees to marry him right after she yells at Peter Parker. It's just because she's mad at him.
Come on. Now, I admit, the MJ John Jameson subplot is pretty undercooked in Spider-Man 2, and who knows, maybe she did develop this serious relationship with an astronaut just to get back at Peter for not wanting to make out in a cemetery. But I kinda doubt it. What makes a lot more sense to me is that she met Jameson and really liked him, but was still really into Peter, and after he made it clear that there was no chance of that going anywhere, she tried to move on with her life with this, boring astronaut guy. So I don't think it was any sort of evil master plan to make Peter miserable. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I think this video just doesn't care about when it comes to the character development in these movies. But let's move on to what seems to be Marcus's real sticking point with these films. how goofy they are.
Got you now, Spider-Man!
One thing that Marcus touches on over and over in his video is just how funny he thinks these movies are, from corny lines from extras to the really over-the-top performances of Willem Dafoe and J.K. Simmons, and I agree with him. I think all that stuff is really funny and enjoyable. But I think there's one big difference between us. I think all of that stuff is a very intentional choice on director Sam Raimi's part, and while I really hesitate to put words into Marcus's mouth, he seems to view it, at best, as a happy accident, or some kind of so bad it's good situation. It really surprised me when he mentioned how much one scene in Spider-Man 2 reminded him of The Evil Dead, because up to that point I was under the assumption that he wasn't very familiar with Raimi's past work, or else he wouldn't be so weirded out by some of the stranger elements of the movies. Now look, I'll be the first to admit that there are aspects of the Raimi movies that are super corny, and if you think that stuff is really dumb, that's totally fine. For me, the cornball extras, the women screaming at the top of their lungs in an homage to old monster movies, and goofy stuff like this is really appealing. And part of what makes these movies so great is how it balances that stuff with the really grounded scenes. That's a very, very tough balance to pull off. Spider-Man 1 does it well, 2 does it incredibly well, and 3, well, you know. But anyway, if Marcus thinks there's not much weight to these emotional scenes, then I can totally see the balancing act not really working for him. But I don't really see the wacky Raiminess of the movies as a liability. If anything, they're the movie's greatest asset. The original Spider-Man trilogy came out before the modern superhero movie genre had really come into its own. And because of that, it gets away with some more interesting personal touches that many films today just couldn't. And just like Chris Nolan brought his more serious, broody sensibility to his Batman movies, Raimi did the same with his own unique style. And honestly, that's something that I really cherish and value. That kind of personal vision is what separates your Ragnaroks from your Dark Worlds. And even though Raimi's vision of Spider-Man's world is maybe a little more heightened than some would like it to be, it's undeniably 100% pure Sam Raimi. And for me, it really doesn't get much better than that. You know, one of the things that I like most about the Raimi trilogy is how many scenes there are of Spider-Man just saving regular people. Something that I feel like is left out of a lot of recent superhero movies. It shows that at the end of the day, Spidey's mission is pretty simple. Help as many people as he can. We'll probably never swoop in to save the day ourselves, but we can help out in less fictional ways. And a great way to do that is by going to the link in the description and downloading Tab for a Cause. Tab for a Cause is a browser extension that donates to a charity of your choice every time you open a new tab without costing you anything. That means that you can help people get clean water through water.org just by browsing as you normally would. It's pretty amazing. Tabbers have now raised more than $450,000 for charity through Tab for a Cause, and it's really easy to get started and join in with their brand new page that's faster, better looking, and even more charitable.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once, because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started, because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes too.